Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation about Germany's evolving policy toward China. We're joined by ACG Young Leader alumna Dana Heide, who served as Handelsblatt's China correspondent for 3 years before moving to Berlin last summer. And in Berlin, she covers the German Foreign Office and focuses also on international affairs, particularly relations between Germany and China. And so I can hardly think of a better person to talk with us today than Dana. Dana, herzlich willkommen, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
It's good to see you virtually, and I'm glad that we got to see each other briefly in Munich last month. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, which I think comes at a very interesting and very critical time. I think it's fair to say that what was once seen as really a mutually beneficial bilateral relationship between China and Germany is being examined very, very closely, being put under a microscope as the government in Berlin considers the complex sort of economic relationship with Beijing, the intertwined relationship, particularly as it reflects on its energy dependence on Russia and this notion of being so dependent on another country for multiple reasons. So let me sort of start with the core question that we want to look at today, which is, has Germany learned any lessons from its dependence on Russia when it comes to dealing with China?
Yes, definitely yes. But the question is to what extent and what follows with that. I think the policy towards China has changed by a lot, especially in this past year. And there are several reasons for that. There's not only the Ukraine conflict that showed Germany that it's not wise to be dependent on one country as much as they have been dependent on Russia's energy. There's the new government in town that is more China critical than the CDU and SPD government was. And then China has changed during the last 3 or 4 years, very, very much. They have changed very much under the leadership of Xi Jinping, and the German government has noticed that and is adjusting its China policy.
So let's pick up a couple of these pieces. I mean, certainly when Annalena Baerbock was on the campaign trail in the last election, and when it was clear that she was going to become foreign minister, she was much more hawkish about China, about Russia as well, than I think many people expected, and certainly than the grand coalition, the CDU SPD government had been beforehand. Do you think it's sort of perspectives like Foreign Minister Baerbock's that have helped shape this new government position, or is there something else going on? I mean, does it have much more to do with the shift from a center-right government under Angela Merkel to the traffic light coalition now under Olaf Scholz?
I think the main driver is probably the Green Party, but the SPD's position has also shifted by a little bit. They have admitted that the party itself, the SPD, has admitted that they've done some mistakes when it came to Russia and the relation with Russia. And I think they have also learned a lesson when it comes to China. But yes, the Green Party is much more critical on China. They have been critical on China as far as I can remember in the last few years. They have been the first ones, for example, to warn against Chinese participation in the 5G network in Germany when other parties didn't even notice this topic. But also the FDP, the liberals, which I find more surprising in this regard, is very critical towards China. And that is interesting, given that they are more pro companies, pro business than other parties in this coalition. So I think it's a mixture of everything, but it's also, it's the debate on China has changed. So of course the debate here in the government, in the business world, also changed.
So we are going to get into a couple of the issues that you've talked about. The 5G piece is something I'd like to get into, but also the business perspective, and then of course how China is changing, which you mentioned at the outset. But before we get to that, you cover the Foreign Office, and while we're talking about the coalition government, I think most of our viewers know that this government is working on a new national security strategy, which was supposed to be released before the end of last year. It was hoped then at the latest that it would be released by the middle of February for the Munich Security Conference. It has not come out yet, but it is clear that China will feature prominently in that overarching national security strategy. And at the same time, the government is working on a separate new China strategy, which I think incorporates some of what you're talking about taking sort of a more sober look at relations with China, and also really looks at trying to find ways to reduce dependence on China. I know, that although some documents have been leaked over the last couple of months, there's no real clarity. But you're in Berlin. What can you tell us about these two security strategy, or about the two strategies, right? The national security strategy on the one hand, and specifically the China strategy on the other. What are you hearing?
The national security is obviously much more broader than the China policy, which is very, very much focused only on China and covers other things than national security itself. And the national security strategy will be more about an integrated security, which also affects, things within China, within Germany, that needs to be improved. The China strategy itself, right now, or the last version that I've seen, was very, very extensive. It had almost 60 pages. So I would assume that this gets distilled a little bit, gets a little bit like maybe 40 pages. I don't know. But I don't think that the overall tone will change much, because I think, as far as I see it, the analysis of China, the China that we have now under Xi Jinping, pretty much matches in every ministry, and the chancellor also acknowledges that China is not the China that we've known 5 or 10 years ago. So I don't think that the tone of the document itself will change. There might be a few changes in, maybe it won't be as detailed. Maybe, it will be. We have. There's a lot of measures in there. For example, that obviously come from the Ministry of Economic Affairs, that affect the businesses in Germany, and the German business doing in China. And I maybe some of those like more detailed positions will be toned down a little bit, but we will see.
Mm-hmm. So maybe related to that, you mentioned earlier that really the debate in Germany regarding China has changed, and I think it would be really valuable for our viewers to hear a little bit more about how you see that change taking place, because particularly for a US audience, or a US based audience, there's the perception, at least, that Germany is, much more cautious when it comes to China, and to upsetting China, that the ties, particularly for a country like Germany, the economic ties are much stronger, and that the perception of China as a threat is not as strong in Germany as it is in the United States. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of how this debate in Germany is unfolding?
So I think up until maybe this year, there hasn't been so much discussion on China. It really just popped up maybe even the last few months. It started with Costco, the big issue with the Chinese company who wanted to buy a stake in the Hamburg harbor, in the port of Hamburg, and then now China is very much in the news. It's very it's also it seems like it's also very sexy for the ministries to look into that, and that I think has to do with the China strategy also, because the ministries were forced to really look at China. How do you want to deal with China? How does the relation with China affect us as a ministry? So they really looked into that. There's also, I think, more emphasis on putting people into positions that have China knowledge. There's just very, very few people who do have that, but I see that ministries are trying to do that. I think it's as far as I know, I don't live in the US, but as far as I see it, I would say the discussion here in Germany is much more nuanced, I would say. I think in the US and also to a certain extent in the UK, the discussion on China and how to shape the relation with China is much more polarized, and this is not the case here. And of course, that has to do with the strong relations of German businesses in China. They have a lot to lose there, and they are warning the government and publicly, but also privately, to not overdo what they are doing when it comes to China. So, but on the other hand, this I also see a certain risk when the debate on China becomes too polarized, that we would forbid everything, like every investment of China in Germany would be prohibited, and that's not a good way to deal with it, because it's just not possible. But it's really, it really depends on who you talk to. But I talk a lot to business people, and I see it, people are much more interested in China. They they look into the Taiwan issue. A lot of people are worried about that. So I think the debate is on a whole different level now. It's not quite there where it should be, considering, I mean, that's also like always surprising to me. The German economy, the German businesses are so dependent on the Chinese market, are so dependent on China, and yet there's so little knowledge about China. Most of the people, they haven't been there. They don't even know how the system works. But I think this is changing little by little, I hope.
So I'd like to maybe come to the sort of economic or business dimension in just a moment, and sort of stick with the foreign policy arena a little bit, because in the last couple of weeks there have been a few, I think, interesting developments that help round out sort of the foreign policy, national security side of things. One is that last month, Wang Yi, who was China's top diplomat at the time, traveled to Europe. And was really trying to improve relations with the EU. It's clear when he spoke at the Munich Security Conference, for example, and in other opportunities he had to speak, that China has not come out and condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese put forward shortly after that a 12-point plan on the war, which was criticized by a number by the EU itself and by a number of member states. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the reaction to his visit to Germany, and the reaction to the peace plan in Berlin?
I think the peace plan also was met with a lot of skepticism here. Of course, in the public, people said, and I think the foreign minister, but also the German chancellor said, it's good that China wants to take a part in, when it comes to peace in Ukraine, but they have to do more than just, give this, in a lot of ways, contradictory.
So, Dana, I think we've lost you. You've frozen.
Is it, I see you still?
Yeah, so now you're back.
Okay.
You froze for me for just a moment.
Okay.
You had only just started to answer the question when you started to freeze, or at least when I lost you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So you'd said that the peace plan was received with some skepticism.
Yes,
in Berlin, and then we sort of lost the rest of that thought.
Yeah, and of course, Annalena Baerbock and Olaf Scholz, German chancellor, they said, they are happy that China wants to take a part in this, but they have to. It comes like it's. I think the German government is coming more towards the conclusion that, or is telling China a little bit more than it used to be. You have to do more. You have to do more than just say everybody should, take back their, or like put down the weapons, and like China needs to really step up and tell Putin to stop the war, and not just, act as a mediator or just, put out nice statements.
So what about the relationship between Xi and Putin, between Beijing and Moscow? I mean, it seems as if the ties are quite strong. Beijing, of course, has held back in any UN resolutions that call for Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. It certainly seems as if the ties between the two are strong. And now, of course, there are the intelligence community in the US is saying it looks as if China might provide lethal weapons to Russia for the war in Ukraine, which of course would escalate things. How is that sort of being thought about in Berlin right now?
So I think, the intelligence doesn't have their own information, so they need to rely on what the Americans are telling them. As far as I know, Scholz has just recently said that he believes that China is not providing lethal weapons to Russia, but I think, also from the US side, it's more of a warning. It's a strong warning. We are watching, and we are watching even if you just talk about providing weapons. So you better not do anything. But overall, you mentioned it before. China is not even condemning the Russian invasion as it is. It's not even saying that it's a war that is happening in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. It talks about a crisis, or right, the China issue, or the Ukraine issue, or the Ukraine crisis, but it doesn't even use the term war. And that was met with, and then again, it's like in the week of the anniversary of the war, of the first day of the war, Wang Yi, the highest representative, foreign policy representative of the Chinese state, travels to Putin, and Putin, you just have to look at the photographs. Putin was so happy to see him, and they said, they found words to emphasize that they are going to strengthen their relation. And there's all of those signs, all of those signals that they are at the side, that China is at the side of Russia in this situation. And, that really irritated people here in Europe. They were really surprised about that. They're very disappointed. China missed the chance to step up as a responsible leader in the world, or responsible, words, power in this regard, and just, everybody is still, everybody was shocked about and in the beginning you could say like, okay, maybe they were surprised, but we don't see any sign that Russia or that China is stepping away from this close relationship with Russia. And that is very closely watched. And I think people in Europe will not forget this.
And do you think that that's also what's driving sort of the shift in the debate in Germany about the relationship with China? I mean, obviously the war has been going on for, more than a year at this point. People have been watching how China has positioned itself. I think things hit a high point last month with the visit of Yi to Moscow. But obviously this didn't just happen overnight. So do you think that that's partly been what has sort of contributed to the transition in the debate that you described for us?
A little bit. I think in the beginning people didn't really notice, or still had the hope that it was very interesting, because like every little sign that might be interpreted as like a shift from China away from Russia was analyzed and was like, no, but now we see a little bit of shift. And there was a huge hope that maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. But I think now people more and more realize that they have this strong bond, and it's more important to them, obviously, or apparently it's more important to them to have a strong bond with Russia than to have a strong bond with or good relation with Europe. And I think more and more people are realizing that. What is surprising to me is that, or maybe it's not surprising, it's just an observation that China really doesn't care as much. When I talk to people about this, it's always like, do they not know that Europeans are irritated by that, or do they not care? This is the big question. If they just don't understand. I mean, it was interesting in the beginning when the war started. I was still in China, and it wasn't an issue at all. Like maybe in the first few days, it was in the news and a little bit, but then it totally died down. It's not the war in Ukraine is not a topic in China, within China, when you live in China. So to a certain extent, they probably, or they might not feel how much of an impact the war has on daily life here, and how much of an emotional impact it also had on people, that there's a war in Europe. But it's really the question, like, do they not want to know about this, or do they really not know?
So, I mean, Dana, I think that that's a really interesting question that you've asked of, do they not realize how irritated the Europeans are, or concerned the Europeans are, or do they just not care? And I guess sort of one way of maybe looking a little bit more closely is looking at this week's meeting of the National People's Congress, basically China's parliament, which is the first time, of course, that the parliament has met since the COVID-0 policy was lifted. It's a huge gathering of about 3,000 people. And from what I've looked at, it seems as if the main focus has been on how the government performed over the past year, to hear a little bit about how the government leaders want to restart the economy and continue to help the recovery from the pandemic and the economic slowdown that China has been subjected to. I've not really seen any mention of the war in Ukraine, but obviously I'm not sort of as closely following China as you are. The other big thing, of course, about this meeting is getting some insights on some of the new key leaders in China who will be shaping some policies. So I'm sure that you've been watching this as closely as one can from abroad, are there any insights on the meeting of China's parliament that you can share with us that you think are relevant in this European and also transatlantic context?
So first of all, what you've mentioned with the Ukraine war, you're right. There was no mentioning. There was also no mentioning of the Ukraine war last year when the war just started and the National People's Congress happened. It's not very usual, like it's not very normal for them to emphasize or like to refer to current events of this kind. So it's a little bit expected that they wouldn't do that. They are always, and again this year, they're always saying like there's threats from outside. We have to stick together and to like prepare. They're always preparing the Chinese people for worse times. So to kind of like get this, we are one and we should stick together. There's an outside world that is dangerous and when you live in China and you talk to people, a lot of times, well, first of all, they say the US is like, I don't want to live in the US. I think this is very interesting. Like people always say, like, I don't want to live in the US. It's dangerous there. There's, there's so many drugs. There's like weapons. To a certain extent, they also say that when it comes to Europe, but less. Mm-hmm. And that the reason for that is because every day they see in the news when it comes to the US, they only see shootings, nature catastrophes, things like that. It's always the negative stuff. So people really believe, I should stay in China. The outside world is dangerous. I don't want to be there, which I find really interesting. So that's also reflected always in the National People's Congress meetings, where they always emphasize, outside world is dangerous, stay here. And then the second thing, so usually the National People's Congress is the most important meeting in a political meeting in the year. But sometimes it's not that interesting, to be honest. It's more like, it's national legislation. It's very when you are a China watcher, it's definitely interesting, but it's more like you have to get into detail and like it's only for China nerds, I would say. This year is different because China is electing or nominating a new cabinet, new state council members. One of them will be the new premier. Li Keqiang, the premier up until now, is leaving his position, and Li Qiang, very similar name, is taking the role as a premier. Also, the economic advisor, so to say, the economic czar, is going to leave. It used to be Liu He, now it's He Lifeng. And we also already, you mentioned at the beginning, we had a change in the foreign ministry. So it's Xingang. And then there's other interesting positions that are going to, get new people in. But they all have in common, and this is very interesting for the years to come. They all have in common that they are very close to Xi. Li Qiang, for example, the new premier, he used to be party secretary in Shanghai, so he used to be like the boss of Shanghai. Mm-hmm. And he has been very close to Xi Jinping for the last couple of years. Same is true for Xingang. He used to be maybe some of you know him, used to be the ambassador for China in the US in Washington. And this is very interesting to see because in the past there has already been very little, very few people who would step up to Xi or had the potential to step up to Xi and say, like, maybe it's not the right way to do it this way. Li Keqiang was said to be one of those people I mean, the State Council, the premier, they really have very little to say under Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is the paramount leader, but when you only have people whose career is dependent on you, who are elected who came to this position in the cabinet, in China's cabinet, in the State Council because of you, then it's even less likely that they will criticize what you are doing, and that is a big challenge that I see for China for the next few years, especially because I mean, I look at the economy very closely, and it does not look that good anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one sort of follow-up question to that: to what degree is Taiwan a topic at the National People's Congress?
I think, it definitely is, and it was. I think during the work report, which is delivered traditionally at the first day of the National People's Congress, I think it was mentioned less aggressive, less aggressive than last year. So that was a good sign. On the other hand, during the press conference of the foreign minister, the new foreign minister Qin Gang, he used aggressive words again, and I think there's no doubt that but I mean, you always have to look at the bigger picture, anyways, and China has made it very clear that they are looking at Taiwan differently than they used to be, and their actions also show that they are much more aggressive when it comes towards Taiwan. We've seen, like, for example, in the air defense identification zone of Taiwan, we've seen a lot more airplanes, a lot more military airplanes from China in the last 2 years. It's increased by so much, and they are also much more aggressive in their tone when they talk about Taiwan, with with other governments, and so I think there's no doubt that this is a very, very important topic for the Chinese government, for the Chinese leadership.
As a China watcher, how concerned are you that Beijing might take military action against Taiwan? I mean, obviously, this is a big topic of discussion in the transatlantic community. There are lots of questions about to what degree Putin's attack on Ukraine is maybe setting a precedent for a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan. What's your sense of whether that's something that's realistic? I mean, I hear different things, right? I mean, I hear from some people the expectation that this is really something that could happen within the next year or two, because of the kind of aggressive tone that people are hearing, like what you're hearing coming out of Beijing. But then I hear from other people that China is watching very closely how Putin and Russia are being treated, and that they've basically become pariahs, that the Chinese economy is in great difficulty, which you alluded to, and that there are demographic trends that China needs to focus on, that it is just simply not in a position to take on that kind of a military challenge at the moment. So what's sort of your sense? I mean, obviously, none of us know, but I think that your analysis would be really interesting.
Yeah, I can just underscore this. It's nobody knows. I don't have the information, and I kind of doubt that anybody has the information that you need to make the assessment. Which year or until when there might be an invasion or any kind of military action against Taiwan, because I think it's the most important factor is, what does Xi Jinping think? And we have very, very little, maybe no insight into what Xi Jinping thinks. Journalists don't have access anymore. Diplomats don't have access anymore. So it's very, very hard. But it all depends on him. And you said a very right. You said a lot of right things, but one of them is that China is certainly watching what happens in Ukraine, or how Europe and the US have reacted to the Ukraine crisis, and I think that was good. Like they reacted in a way that China must think, okay, they are sticking together and they mean business. They are acting together and they are acting fast. So I think, but it's not, of course, from an economic point of view, it doesn't make sense, because the Chinese economy is not in a good shape. They have a lot of problems. They are reforming. They're in the midst of the biggest reform of the real estate sector in, I don't know, ever, years. And they have the demographic changes. They're regulating the tech sector, which is huge. They have so many Baustellen. They have so many
construction sites, if you will.
Construction sites, so to say. It wouldn't be a wise thing, and the US has made it very clear. I think. Biden said it 3 times, and he's old, but I don't think that he's that old. That he's like, he said 3 times that they are going to take military action. Always, like, some people from his, I think from the State Department has said, like, no, it wasn't meant in that way. But I do think that it was a message. It was a very clear message that he wanted to send. So China can be sure that the consequences of this will be huge. But the last 3 years have shown us that the Chinese state leadership doesn't always make base decision on economic, if it makes economic sense anymore. It maybe used to be like that, like for, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe, but it's not like that. I mean, we've seen that very clear during the COVID years. They have taken drastic measures and they've hurt their own economy so much. The trust of foreign companies in the Chinese market is very low, historic lows, because of the actions that China has taken. So it might not. When they think about taking action towards Taiwan, it might not be the economic sanctions that come to their mind at first. It might be, it's like a goal that Xi Jinping has, during his lifetime. But nevertheless, I think it's very important, and there we come to Germany again, that the German government can say, with a assertiveness that we will take action and we will sanction China when it comes to this. And it doesn't matter if our companies lose business in China. We will do that. So be prepared. To put there, but it's. The problem with Taiwan is also China. I mean, 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't as clear that Taiwan doesn't want to be part of China under a Chinese government. But I think that is. Oh, sorry. I have a dog in the background. Sorry.
Your dog wants to be part of the discussion.
Yeah. He just wants to, he wants to say, sorry. Just 1 minute. Okay, sorry.
All right. No problem.
Where was I?
Well, just that the German government should be more assertive and would take action if there is and
Exactly.
act of aggression, which actually sort of comes back to another topic that I said that we would come back to, which is we've talked largely about foreign policy and national security issues. There is a lot of tension in a number of different relationships. We haven't really talked about the economic dimension as much. I mean, you've alluded to it a little bit. You've talked about the strong economic ties between Germany and China. You also just talked about the fact that the German government has an opportunity to be assertive and show leadership by stating it would take action, it would introduce sanctions, even if that had a negative impact on German business. But earlier in the conversation, you also talked about how surprised you sometimes are that the business community has this strong dependence on China, both for imports, but also as an export market, but that there's a real limited level of knowledge when it comes to China. Can you talk a little bit about this sort of economic dimension and the sort of where the business community is as the policy community and the government are having these really in-depth conversations about recalibrating the relationship with China?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's the position of the business community is very much depends very much on to whom in the business community you are talking to. So like I think the smaller businesses, the family businesses, they very much realized in the last year, I would say, that it's not wise to be too dependent on China. It's not only the China policy of the German government that led to this. I wouldn't even say it's a really big issue. I think it was more like the Ukraine war, and then the Taiwan, the visit of Pelosi in Taiwan and China's reaction to that really alerted a lot of business people. I think and they were like, wait a minute, maybe we should have a deeper look into that. So, but also what shouldn't be underestimated is China itself. I think the last year that China is not the very, very stable market that it used to be. It always used to be like there's a huge market and the political environment is very stable. Not much change when it comes to regulations. It's very limited. You have to be in joint ventures, but once you're there, it's very stable. But that has changed. That has changed dramatically. And as I said, the trust of the companies in the Chinese market has deteriorated as well. So you have those companies who are thinking about diversifying and not putting all of their baskets in all of their eggs in one basket, as the chancellor says. Yeah. But then you have big companies like Volkswagen, BASF, BMW, Mercedes. They are already invested in the market very, very much. They depend on the market when it comes to revenue, or in the case of BASF, they have invested so much money that it just has to work out. So they have this certain dependency on the market, and that is not going to change anytime soon. And there's very, very little that the German government can do, or that they have done so far, to convince the companies to maybe change and diversify more. They have so what they've done is they have limited investment guarantees for the Chinese market. I mean, it's not something that is aimed only at the Chinese market. It's a broader instrument. But they have the result is that companies get fewer investment guarantees for the Chinese market when they want to invest in the Chinese market. But this is not going to stop big companies from investing in a very lucrative market. I mean, they especially the big companies, they see the profits there, and of course they go there. So so it really depends on who you are talking to. And I think what all of the companies large or small, have realized is that it's not wise to be dependent on one country when it comes to the critical minerals, critical materials, critical raw materials. Rare earth is the best example, where, we depend up to 95% on China. But this is a very, it's a very complex process. And it will take years, I think, to have other suppliers of those materials that we get from China right now, and it will be very costly. It will cost a lot of money. There's a reason why we got so much raw earth from China, because it was cheap to get it from there. And yeah, so this will change. But I think also in the business community, the way the business community sees China has changed in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. So there's more sort of skepticism and caution when it comes to China. Yeah, I would definitely say that. But also there's also still a lot of optimism and hope. Like Volkswagen and Mercedes, they are still investing. Yeah. BASF is still investing because there's it's understandable from a business point of view. Mm-hmm. Especially like the chemical market is just it's a huge market, and when it comes to China, I think you have to really look at what your company is producing. Mm-hmm. When your company is producing something that Chinese companies are not able to produce, and that is important for the Chinese government, for the Chinese state leadership, then you will have a few good years ahead, I think. Mm-hmm. But when you're producing things like cars, especially electric vehicles, yeah. Chinese companies are really good at producing electric vehicles, and maybe they have a few good years ahead, but maybe they don't. And but some areas are more obvious than others, like clothing. It's not, there's really good Chinese brands, and so yeah. So bringing sort of this economic discussion even a little closer to home, in today's news, there were reports that the government under Olaf Scholz is preparing to force telecom companies to actually remove the equipment that was made by Huawei and ZTE, Chinese-based companies, out of their networks. And this comes at a time when I think some of the major companies like Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone, Telefonica basically ignored warnings about sort of security concerns related to Huawei and ZTE, and actually built almost 60% of Germany's 5G network using Huawei components. I guess the first question, and I know that this is something that you've covered in the paper, but the first question is, do you think this will actually happen? And how is this news being received? When it comes to the question of will it happen? It seems like the responsible authorities for that to happen are very much convinced that it needs to happen. So mm-hmm. I would probably say yes, it mm-hmm. will probably happen. But yeah, we will see. I think we will see that pretty soon too. Probably until the middle of this year, we will see if there needs to be a decision made, I think. And well, there's always of course, the telecom companies are not happy about that because they, mm-hmm. It costs a lot of money. And the German government has made very clear that it's not the taxpayers' money. It's going to be the telecoms company's money. So they're certainly not happy about that. I think what will happen is that they will, in the future, they will just blame everything when it comes to really delay in 5G, in the building of the 5G network. They would just blame everything on this decision. Mm-hmm. This is my assumption. Right.
I mean, this is part of the German government not taking a clear decision on the Huawei issue during the last few years. They haven't said like other countries have done, we don't want Chinese technology in our very critical network. They've just kind of left it open to interpretation, and the telecoms apparently interpreted in that way. And but yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, the final decision is not out yet. There's only a tendency, but I do think that the tendency is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm. So taking sort of a step back from all of this, I have a couple of viewer questions that I like to ask, and then maybe squeeze in a final question. One of our viewers is curious, sort of listening to everything that we've talked about and the very tense situation with the war in Ukraine and sort of this strong connection between Xi and Putin, between Beijing and Moscow. But then also thinking about the Taiwan question, of course. Our viewer is curious whether we're sort of sleepwalking into another Sarajevo moment, and whether there are sort of missed opportunities that we're not taking advantage of to try to de-escalate the situation, whether it's at meetings like the ones in Munich and Bangalore, in Delhi, particularly in light of the provocation through Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, through McCarthy's visit to Taiwan. Do you think that we're approaching this sort of tinderbox? Is, I guess, the core question. And are there ways to de-escalate that?
It's a very good question, and I think we should always try to keep on talking. I think especially the U.S. government has done that. As you probably remember, before the balloon incident happened, Blinken was going to travel to Beijing to even meet with Xi Jinping. And me and other, I think, people who looked at that were kind of hopeful and saw that as a good sign. And then the balloon incident happened, which was very unfortunate. So I think it's of course it's very important that governments take the opportunity to take every opportunity they can to talk face to face and to visit each other. German Chancellor Scholz, he went to Beijing in November, I think, even though there were still a lot of those COVID measures in place, which made the trip very strange and stressful. But I want to refer to a term you used when you mentioned the Pelosi visit in Taiwan. You said it was a provocation. That is very much seen from the Chinese point of view. It's not forbidden for Pelosi to go there. So China reacts very, very sensitive to anything that is related to Taiwan, and maybe sometimes they are overreacting a little bit, and so should we say, okay, we don't go to Taiwan anymore because probably not. But yeah, so, I really hope that and it's very important that discussions and meetings take place. The German government will have consultations with the Chinese government very soon. So they meet with every minister, which is great. They have conversations there. And that is it's very important, it's crucial. And I really hope, especially with the Taiwan issue, one of my biggest worries is that, because the Chinese fighter jets are flying so close to American jets or Taiwanese jets, that maybe someday there will be an accident, or and also with the balloon incident, it's I really hope that the governments in that case just, take a phone call and like just talk to each other and say like, hey, it's
let's not let things get overblown, right? I mean, let's make sure that we can de-escalate when we need to. So maybe one more question related to Taiwan that just came in from one of our viewers who's curious whether you think that the stronger Chinese stance on Taiwan has anything to do with the nature of Western reactions or lack thereof to Chinese border disputes with India, Bhutan, and the Philippines.
I doubt it. I don't have a really good explanation of why they are like, reacting so much more sensitive or like flying into the others so much more often. I think it's a mixture of, inner like domestic issues, but I don't see necessarily a relation with the India border dispute or our reaction towards it. I think what was really bad was the reaction of the international community when it came to Hong Kong. There was basically not a very big reaction, even though even the German government said that they broke international law, when they like kind of like took over Hong Kong the way they did. So I think that kind of like send a strong signal to the Chinese government, whatever, we just watch.
So we only have about a minute or two left, and I wanted to close by asking you about tomorrow. Tomorrow, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will be in Washington to meet with Joe Biden. I'm sure that they'll be talking about Ukraine, but I'm also sure that China will be at the top of the agenda when the two of them meet, particularly since in the run-up to the meeting, U.S. officials have been coming out with some urgent warnings about Beijing, but they've also been sort of making pledges to smooth over some trade disputes with Europe. The European response has been a little bit ambivalent up to now, with some countries being hesitant to pull away from China for all the reasons that we've talked about. And I guess one question I have for you is, do you think that we'll see sort of some greater transatlantic alignment or unity coming out of the meeting tomorrow?
Maybe not necessarily coming out of the meeting tomorrow. I'm not aware of that they have, something in their sleeves that they will, but I think in the long run, definitely there will be more alignment between the US and Europe. For one reason in particular as well, von der Leyen is very China critical anyways, but I do think that the pressure from the American side will increase even more because in their view, they have helped Europe so much with Ukraine. They gave so much money that they probably will increase the pressure towards Europe to align itself with the US when it comes towards China.
Well, Dana, thank you so much. This has been a very informative and thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us today. And I look forward to continuing the discussion at a future date, because certainly the topics that you cover at Handelsblatt are topics that will continue to be of great interest to us all.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.